Previously on AgentPalmer.com, Ethan Gilsdorf builds an immersive experience in fantasy freaks and gaming geeks. You should be listening to the Scrubs Rewatch podcast, Fake Doctors, Real Friends with Zach and Donald. And while Tina's journey is inspirational, her success is aspirational. This is the Palmer Files, episode 42, with Bill, Dan, Tristan, Geoffrey, Paula, Sara, Neil, Brian, Nia, Shane, and Andrew, discussing projects, origins, survival, and more than a few stories. Are you ready? Let's do the show. Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this 42nd episode are Bill, Dan, Tristan, Geoffrey, Paula, Sara, Neil, Brian, Nia, Shane, and Andrew. What you are about to hear is something different for this podcast. It came to my attention that not everyone is staying until the end. Those of you who do know that when the last note rings out, finishing the outro song that Henno Heider of Monkey Tongue Productions created for me, I let the guest of the show ask me one final question. For some of you, you've heard all of these, and I thank you for listening so diligently to the end. And for others, well, either welcome to the show if this is your first time, or welcome to an episode full of some of the fun you may have missed. I'm planning on doing one of these for every 25 episodes, but you will not hear the one final question for each of the first 25 episodes, just a select number of them. The criteria for selection is really my whim. Some were similar either in the question asked or my answer to other ones when listened back to back. Others required the context of the episode that preceded it. These should all stand on their own. You will hear short discussions about unfinished projects, podcasting, apocalypse survival teams, and a few additional stories. Before we get going, remember that if you want to discuss the episode as you listen or afterwards, you can tweet me at Agent Palmer and this show at The Palmer Files. All of my guests' Twitters and links to their respective episodes can be found in the show notes. And don't forget that all of my writings and rantings can be found on AgentPalmer.com. And of course, email can be sent to thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's get into it. So Bill, do you have one last question?
Something for you. Well, we talked a lot about projects, and not that you don't have to get crazy specific, but do you have... Because I know I kind of do. So do you have like one project that like is like off to the side, is like, that's like, I really want to do that. That's the thing that like scares me the most or seems like the most work, but is like one of like the dream kind of project things to get done one day, the Great American Novel or something of that, like, you know what I mean? Like something that feels like, oh, I'm going to get to that. It's a lot of work. It's a big project, but I'm going to, man, I hope I get to it.
Yes, but it's not my project. I'm a part of it. So This is how it works. I've got a friend named Jason Zapata, and he is a writer and a poet. And I edited his book, which, by the way, it's called Nocturnal Wanderings. You can get it on Amazon. I'll pitch his book real quick.
Sure.
But he wrote a novel from beginning to end. Mm-hmm. And I edited said novel on the first draft, and it's been on the shelf ever since. Mm. And I really want to get that thing published. And he wavers on it. And so that's like the big project. Will it ever? It's not, again, and it speaks to a lot of the episode. Like, it's not mine.
Not yours, right.
But I'm also invested in it. And I was, I was a sounding board throughout the creation of the first draft. And I really want to see it to fruition, almost more for him than for me.
Sure. It's earned a little place in you. Yeah.
That's the big project. And it's like, and every once in a while I'll bring it up to him. Like he's one of my best friends. So I'm like, I don't bring it up all the time, but occasionally I'll be like, and I won't even say what it is just in case. But I'm like,
any movement on that thing?
We going to look at that again? We going to do
yeah, anytime soon? We're going to dust that off?
That's the one.
You hear that, Zapata? Get on it.
Dan, do you have one question you would like to ask me?
All right, Palmer, one last question for you. I've talked about my favorite dog breed. What's yours?
I'm a cat person.
That explains it. Cut to music.
Done. Beautiful. So, Tristan, do you have one final question for me?
Yes, I do. I do, in fact. After all the years of being around podcasters, doing podcasts, editing other people's podcasts, editing other people's shows, editing scripts for other people's shows, helping out on all the behind the scenes things, how does it feel to now be doing the podcast and be the presenter of it? Have you always wanted to be the presenter of a podcast? Or do you feel like this is something you've kind of almost had to do because that's what everybody does? How do you feel about that?
I won't say I had to do it, but I will say it's a scenario where it was a confluence of a lot of things. I spent 2 years thinking about doing a podcast. So first I needed to figure out what I was going to do. I think all of the things you just mentioned of the things I did made it easier to do. I'm not afraid of the mic, I'm not afraid of editing, and I'm not afraid to reach out and book guests because I've done that for other people. What it really boiled down to was, for a short time on my blog, I was doing interrogations, which were Q&As, which is the only way you can really have a conversation in text form. And they're not necessarily fulfilling. I'm not unhappy with them, but there's only so much you can do. I'm not going to email you back and forth, Tristan, 100 times and edit the whole thing together and put it on my blog. Having a conversation was going to be better. And I didn't have, I can blame a few people if I really wanted to, but I was meeting more people and I was meeting authors and, telling people that I was involved in podcasting. And then the follow-up was always, but I don't have a show to put you on. Like, none of the shows I was involved with were for an author. It's not a slight on anyone, but all of the people whose podcasts I was working on, they don't have time to read a book and then have an author on. So I can read your book and write the review on my blog, but you're not going to be able to be on a podcast. And I haven't had an author on yet, but there's going to be authors on this show. And that's a big reason. One of the big reasons why is I want to talk to these authors about the books they've written. And I want to know what else they're reading, and their influences, but I didn't have a platform for them. And now I do. And I have a platform for other people. Like, I have a platform for you, and I have so I can have these conversations. And anybody who's familiar with the back catalog of the Proxy Cast, as it were, a lot of those were fun shows. I didn't really do a lot of serious discussion, and that's really what I wanted this to be. And it was always going to be easier to start my own show than to convince somebody else. Like, do you mind doing a serious conversation and dropping the humor altogether? Like, I'm not saying you can't have a good time, but can we not with the dick and fart jokes? So it was just going to be easier. And thinking about it for 2 years and helping everybody with all their stuff, you start to tick boxes. This is what I want to do. This is what I don't want to do. And the idea of the show gets narrower until I have a show. I hope this answered your question.
But it's really interesting that you're saying this, because it's quite a similar reason as to why I started podcasting when I was 16 years old. I've technically been podcasting for 12 years.
Brag about it.
Oh.
Fine.
Oh. No. It's you know what? I had some hiatuses in the middle, but it was 2014 when I started the Anarchaeologist podcast, which now has become the Modern Myth podcast. I'm inserting the names so that you can go and find it. So anyway, what was I going to say?
Oh, it's all going to be in the show notes.
Yeah, I know, but I like saying it as well. It's my show. What was I going to say? Yeah. So when I was it was 2014. I just finished my degree in archaeology with chemistry. And I was like, right, I need a radical, like, really kind of crazy archaeology podcast that isn't scared to ask really difficult questions and confront difficult history. And, like, I'm looking through them all, and they're all like, and this is what happened in Rome in Britain, and this is archaeology, Indiana Jones. And I'm like, oh my god, it was so bad. So I had to make my own. And I had done a lot of podcasts beforehand, and I think I had to make it. There was no choice in it. I had to make it. And that's what I feel is like so important about podcasting, is you almost have to feel like you have to make it. Like there's a relentless energy behind it. And I think that's it was always inevitable, Jason. Always inevitable. Always. Doomed to podcast.
So, Geoffrey, before we go, do you have one final question for me?
I do, Jason. Jason, tell me, who or what is Agent Palmer?
So, this is my Tony Stark moment. I am Agent Palmer. No,
Yes. What is that? What is
so
that?
So when I was getting ready to start the blog, I realized that I didn't necessarily want to write under my name. I didn't know what the blog was going to become. I just knew I wanted to start one, and I was like, well, what do I need a brand. And I've always been a fan of James Bond, but I didn't want to necessarily go that direction. And it had just so happened that, I don't know, I want to give credit to my mother for something in regards to Palmer, so I'm going to give her credit for this. I think my mother was explaining to me that Michael Caine playing Austin Powers' father in the movie was funny because he used to do spy flicks in the 60s. So
Right, yeah.
I went back and I was like, well, all right, I'm game for anything, and it's not Bond, so it should be very interesting. And so I watched the Ipcress file.
Oh, okay, which I have not seen.
And I watched the Ipcress file, and then I burned through Funeral in Berlin and Bullet to Beijing, I think, are the three movies. Now, listen, Ipcress file is like the best one of all of them. But he was Harry Palmer in that.
He was Harry Palmer, right. Okay.
So I was like, well, I can't actually crib the name. Like, I can't be Harry Palmer because that's a guy played by Michael Caine. But I can be Agent Palmer. And because I'm, also an Orioles fan, like it had the nice, Jim Palmer, thing.
Of course, yeah.
So it
God,
became
Jim Palmer, he was huge.
Agent Palmer is what it became. And then, it was like an afterthought, right? Like, it was just like, all right, that's fine. And then I started the blog and I started writing, and nobody said anything, right? I start my Twitter at Agent Palmer, and then, of course, I'm not going to use my face because I'm not using my name. So I'll put up a picture of Michael Caine from the Ipcress file. And, then it's not until Grant and 7 Days a Geek, because Grant gets the reference.
He got it. Oh my God.
Grant's the one who, and I don't know when it is, but when I first start showing up in the chat rooms for 7 Days a Geek's live episodes, you'll hear Grant not say Palmer, he says Harry.
Oh,
at least in the very beginning, before he even knew who I really was.
Yeah, I was on one of those. Do you remember? Were you? I was on one of those live shows.
I was. I mean, I'm gonna say yes because I went back. I actually went back through the 7 Days of Geek back catalog, so I would have heard it. But at one point, I think it was after I did the Stranger Cons. Grant went back to the Agent Palmer and stopped calling me Harry. But occasionally, Grant will call me Harry because he was the one who got it. And now, my Twitter now says my real name, and on this show I use my real name, and I've kind of started to move out from behind. I mean, at some point,
and your real voice,
real voice. I mean, it's always been my real voice, and it's like, I guess here's the worst kept secret about Agent Palmer. I didn't change anything. Like I didn't pretend to like anything. I didn't pretend to hate anything. My personality was exactly the same. All I was doing was using a pen name. I didn't.
Oh, that's good. Though, I mean, I totally get it. I thought it was something to do with the X-Files, to be honest.
No, and there's
I didn't.
There's
know.
a Palmer, an Agent Palmer on NCIS that will come up in Google searches.
Oh, okay.
I occasionally I rank ahead of that. If you just Google Agent Palmer, so I always go check to see where I am in the rankings for Agent Palmer. And that's basically the story. But I got to give my mother credit for explaining to me why Michael Caine was chosen as Austin Powers' father.
Well, way to go, Mom.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have 2 questions.
I'll give you 2.
Okay. All right. Are you reading fiction or nonfiction right now?
Right now?
Yeah.
Fiction.
Fiction?
Yeah.
Interesting. What are you reading?
I'm reading Goodbye Mickey Mouse by Len Dayton.
Ooh, how is it?
It is probably the most... So I've been reading through Len Dayton's bibliography because of my brand, right?
Oh, yeah.
I stole Palmer from the Ipcress File movie, and I was like, well, I should read the book, and I fell in love with it, and I've been reading through, and he did a lot of nonfiction about World War II.
Yep.
And this is fiction about World War II.
Ooh.
But the thing that makes...
That'd be well written.
He's written realistic fiction about World War II as well.
Yeah.
But this one in particular, there's a romance in the beginning of it that's probably one of the best romances or maybe the only romance that's really been in one of his. And I'm very worried for this relationship because it's the beginning of, the one American just got there, and I'm very worried. While he's the lead, I don't know, maybe he'll die. It's a war, he's a fighter pilot. There's never any guarantees.
I mean, the odds are.
But it's one, I don't know what it is. It could be that I've already kind of slogged through the nonfiction of World War II that I was like, well, I set my sights to read everything he wrote. I'm going to do it in the order he wrote it in, and I'm not going to just cut corners. So I read a lot on World War II that I otherwise wouldn't have. So I have the base of knowledge that I know he already knows because he wrote those books. I'm reading them in the order they were published. But there's just something about this book that it's like, I don't know. It's more engaging to me. And I don't know if it would have been. I think part of it is the journey, right? So all the other World War II things.
Yeah.
So I know how factually accurate he's being.
I think that adds a depth and a nuance, though.
It does. But there's also these characters who are basically struggling for survival in World War II bombed out Britain.
Wow.
It's different than some of the other spy fiction of his that I've read.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. That sounds really worthwhile, actually. Taking notes. What is, final question?
Sure.
What is at the top of your playlist?
what is at the top of my playlist? At the moment, a lot of Canadian bands.
Yeah.
And it's not because I'm talking
Welcome to
to
the
you,
dark side.
but like today, for example, I listened to 5 artists. Okay. Because I have an Amazon device, and I'm like, hey, play X, right?
Yeah.
So today I asked it to play the Tragically Hip.
Yep.
I asked it to play Bob Dylan's Oh Mercy album.
Ooh.
I asked it to play The Beaches.
Yeah, Beaches.
I asked it to play The Trues.
Aw.
And I asked it to play the Gin Blossoms.
Nice.
Those are the 5 bands.
Eclectic mix. You're spanning decades with that mix.
And genres, and I'm showing my elder millennial, almost Gen X roots.
I do have a question, and it's because it's been on my mind because I always do icebreakers on the first day of class, which is super lame, but I want students to talk in my classes, and I know of no better way to do that than to make them answer some dumb question on the first day and get them used to just talking in front of everybody. And I think the question I'm asking this year is, who are your 3 picks for your apocalypse survival team?
Alive or dead?
Like dealer's living choice. Like they can be living, dead. They can be fiction. They can be nonfiction. Dealer's choice.
Wow.
I for sure am going with Bear Grylls.
Okay.
And this is not fair because I've given it some thought, obviously.
Yeah.
Because that dude will keep you alive no matter what. I feel like the Pioneer Woman, who is the woman who does like the cooking. She has the cookware and recipes. She's gonna know how to like. Is that edible or not? And can she make it palatable? And then I always keep my third one open for how I'm feeling that day.
Wow. I mean,
and the apocalypse can be of your choosing. Like if you need to know that it's a nuclear apocalypse or a zombie or whatever, just okay.
Like I feel I want to go with Tony Stark.
Oh sure.
Because like, well, the Iron Man tech is fun, but I feel like a guy who can make an Iron Man suit could probably make anything else you forgot. Right?
He can make potable water.
I'm sure he could also like, oh, I don't have a knife. Oh, what do you need a knife for? I'm going to open this can. Oh, well, I'll just make you a can. You know what I mean? Like, all right, okay, good. Like, I have my inventor.
Plus, he is on the record as saving people, right? He's not just in it for himself. For as much as he's a billionaire playboy, he really cares about other people. So you need that too.
Sure. I mean, I guess the other 2 are.
Let's assume you've got Steph. You've got your like. You don't need to choose people you love. You can choose. You know,
okay,
they're already safe.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna go fiction. Then I might as well just go fiction. So like, we'll go Tony Stark, one of the Gilmore Girls, because I feel like I want to keep talking. I want somebody who's not going to get sick of talking. And if you pick a Gilmore Girl, either right, I guess Rory's closer to my age. But I feel like we're not going to run out of shit to talk about. So I'm never going to get bored.
Is it weird that I would pick Emily?
Ooh, yeah. Or is it weird?
She will make sure we are living at a certain level. She will do what she needs to do to make sure we have like clean pillowcases.
Yeah, no. All
right, fair. Continue.
And a third, I probably would. This sounds like a cop out, right? But I probably go with Harry Palmer. I probably go with the unbond spy, just because maybe that will come in handy. And you know, at least as he's portrayed in the books, he's a very good cook. So that
and
rounds
he's probably
out
got great stories, right? Like again, you've got kind of a talker.
Yeah.
So
actually, all 3 of them are talkers. So like, this is going to be the best podcast that anybody who happens to encounter us is ever going to hear.
When you set up your recording studio of rocks and like vines, okay, talk into the rock. Check the level. Just the vines. Okay, we're good. Go.
All right, Neil, do you have one final question for me?
I do. If you had to get rid of one color, so you and society would never see this color again, what color would that be? And I'm not going to go into like, well, if you get rid of a primary color, then that gets rid of every, it's not that deep. It's just that one color.
I want to say red.
Mm-hmm.
Just because on the off chance that when it disappears, so does like the phrasing of like, I'm so mad I'm seeing red, and maybe everybody just calms down.
When you said that, that's the first thing that came to my head was the Warrant song I Saw Red, because I'm like, that would be gone, as well as that, I thought of Red Line and being so angry you see red. That's hilarious.
Maybe that would calm everybody down.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. I like that. That's good. I was for me, just the one color or lack of color, but again, this has nothing to do. There's no socio-political, racial tones of this. But I always thought it would be interesting to get rid of black, because all of that stuff that we see that is black would now have to be an actual color. Tires, all these things that just easier to have. I mean, the sky at night would be different. All these things would just be eliminated.
Wow.
Yeah.
I thought, I mean, for a moment that flashed through my head, but I was like, I don't know what, I'm a big physical book reader. So I was like, I don't know if I could read a novel in red ink. Like, I just don't know if I could do that.
Bright orange. You're like, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Brian, do you have one final question for me?
I actually do here. So when it comes to biography, don't tell me a biography you would like to read the most. Tell me a biography you would like to write the most.
I attempted this with a blog post about Ralph Bakshi.
Oh, great subject.
And it was one of the first serious research things I did in the early parts of my blog. Is I made a decision I wanted to do a series on Ralph Bakshi, and I cleverly called it the Rotospective. So I started with Wizards, and I wrote a little bit, and it wasn't like in depth, and then it got away from me, and I basically wrote about his movies in the order I had watched them, not the order that they had been released. And when I got to like American Pop, I was writing like full on like commentaries on the movies. So it kind of got away from me. But at a certain point, I circled back and I went, all right, I'm going to write about the man now, the artist himself. And I did a lot of research, and I'm not unhappy with it, but it's very I feel like there's not a lot of heart in it. Like, I tried to give it a little bit more heft maybe than I should have. Like, I probably was writing out of my depth. I think now, with years more experience, not just in research, but in writing in general, I feel like I could do it better. But I feel like that's the one I would want to do most, because as an artist, he absolutely inspires me, just kind of similar to, everybody we talked about in this episode. Like, he wanted control, and, when he didn't get that control, ultimately in like Cool World, he walked away. And that's probably the one I would want to write the most.
Well, in the research, it sounds like you've already got quite a bit of it, but that's, so is it one of those you would go back years later and start, gathering your papers about you and, putting on your robe and sitting down and write? Is that one that you regret not doing, or would you go back at some point in the future and say, you know what, maybe I'll take this up again?
It's possible. So the idea of me writing a book has been, I don't know if it's every blogger, because I don't talk to a lot of bloggers, but my mother self-published a book, so maybe that has something to do with it. But I get a lot of, oh, you're a blogger, when are you going to write a book? And it's like, well, I mean, it's on my blog, it's on my website. Like I've written the equivalent of a book. It's not like I can't write that many words. I just, and maybe Bakshi would be one of those scenarios of somebody I would want to write about, although he's written his own stuff that's covered himself very well. But I do get that.
Can you trust it?
I think so. I feel like he's the kind of artist that wouldn't, from that beatnik generation that just, I feel like there's a certain generation out there of, maybe they're not telling you the whole truth, but they're not sugarcoating anything.
Right.
But I always get this question of like, when are you going to write a book? And I feel like if I was inspired to do it, I would have done it already. I'm not saying it's not in the cards, but it's just, and I'm also not one of those writers who's like, you have to be inspired to write. I've written because I want to.
Well, I mean, that's a great way to look at it, because, something like a book, and especially a biography, like I was saying earlier, about a lot of biography is a fit between subject and biographer. You don't ever, in my opinion, want biography to feel like you're writing a book report, because that makes you rush things, I think, first of all. So I think your instinct on it is right. I mean, you don't necessarily have to enjoy writing it, but it needs to be one that you feel connected to. And, don't sit down at your desk and go, oh God, here we go into this world again. Well, that's the worst thing I think can happen to you as a biographer. You might get to a chapter like, oh God, this is like the really sad part of the story to write, but that's different from, God, I wish I wasn't writing this.
Well, that it does lead me to one final question back to you, which is, can you be too big of a fan to write? Like, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Ralph Bakshi. Is it possible my fandom brings me too close to the subject matter? Is that?
It can, but I think, I think it's like anything. And this sounds like I'm, trying to put an escape hatch into the question, but I think it just comes with practice on it and reading, that's why I asked you the question about, can you trust Bakshi's, memoirs? Because, you read a lot of stuff from George Lucas, and like, you can just smell the bullshit coming off of it. And, and part of you kind of laughs, you're like, I'm not going to let him get away at that. So, I mean, I think that sort of comes with practice. You start to know when you start reading about your subject, what you would like to happen versus what actually happened. And I think that when you're a biographer, you want to be, true to your subject. And the best way to be true to your subject is to be honest about it. Now, you can bring your warmth to it. I mean, I was, telling somebody that I don't write takedowns. And I had somebody say, you're the only person that could ever written a biography about Jim Henson and exposed his marital infidelities and gotten away with it, and people loving him when the book is over. Because, I think in a way, I'm forgiving of Jim for that, but what I want people to do is understand Jim more than anything on that. So I think, being a fan does bring, you're bringing something to the table, but I think any subject you write about, you're going to bring something to the table that you have to contend with, whether you're writing a book about Joe McCarthy and you absolutely hate the man, and yet he's fascinating, and his story is fascinating, and what he did is fascinating, even as it's terrible. And I think that helps shape the way you tell your stories and write your narratives. I think it's what makes biographies so rich. I mean, you had the same sources I had for Jim Henson, probably written a completely different book. I just think we bring our own things to it, and that's what makes biography really interesting and fun. It's why people can keep writing books on Abraham Lincoln. For the last 200 years, I think there's something like, 58 books on Lincoln produced a year on average or something like that. Everybody's got a different take they bring to it. There's a brand new biography of George Washington by Alexis Coe that's just, marvelous and funny and interesting and fun. And I think that's the really fun part of biographies, because it's people telling the stories of people, and people bring their biases and their own, sense of what's interesting to them to the story and to telling someone else's story.
Well, I'll leave it under consideration I'll add it to the to-do list.
I think that's a great place for it.
Yeah, right next to the list of all the books I still have to read.
Great.
All right, Nia, do you have one final question for me?
I'm curious. You said you almost fell into sound engineering career course early on. If you had gone that direction, where do you think you would have ended up?
There's a part, I mean, the initial direction I had thought of was in music production, because it was what I had toyed around in the most. I was never the best musician. I played bass, I played guitar, I played a little bit of drums. I was proficient enough to fake it with other people. But what I was better at than anyone else within my circle was mixing things on what at the time was a Tascam Portastudio. So I felt like because I was more proficient, that probably would have been my direction. But that was just being a board jockey. So where I would have ended up after maybe going to a school like the one you did is anyone's guess. Like, I honestly don't know. It's just I'm comfortable enough with the technology that I probably would have gone where I probably would have done what you did, which is like whatever was more fun in class, in different disciplines. But I think initially it would have been music. I think if I put myself back in that space now, you know, and for those people that are like, have followed my circle, like producer Palmer's not a joke. Like I have done the whole, like being in someone's ear while they're recording. And I know from now, you know, editing my own show, I know what I'm listening for. And it's not even editing my own show. It's, you know, I used to write the show notes for the Wicked Theory podcast. And I used to do it live so that Bill wouldn't have to, because his turnaround was record live Saturday night and then put it out Monday. So I would write the show notes live when he was recording. So that was done, right? He could just mix it down, put it together with whatever he needed to do in post, and then put it out Monday. So I've got an ear for like what worked, what didn't. You know, Bill and I used to, nothing ever came of it. It was a live show. It's hard to do, but Bill and I would quote unquote debrief after episodes, right? And I think, and you'd have to ask him, but I think I got a better sense of what works and what doesn't, in general. So there are times when I'll listen to a podcast and I'll be like, all right, like that segment should have probably been cut. Like if this was an edited show, that segment would be gone. And I wonder if maybe that would have been the direction that took me away from like sound design into actual producing, because I feel like while I'm comfortable at the board and I'm comfortable in the editing, I think the thing I'm best at now that's adjusted is using my ear for storytelling for what works and what doesn't, which is an adjustment. That's like it's like a weird, like emotional maturity. It's like a job maturity, because I don't know if that's something that I've had all this practice at it, which is how it's kind of come to the forefront of like, well, I know that's a skill set I now have. But initially, yeah, I was like, nope, like let's just record musicians.
And do you really enjoy the aspect of working with someone, like producing artists who are being creative, or do you like creating the thing yourself?
Oh, no. In a perfect world, I am someone's Brendan McDonald to someone else's Mark Maron. Like, in a perfect world, that's who I am. Like, I'm not the guy on mic. Now, I created this show because no one around me was going to create this show. So that's one thing. And I enjoy doing this, but I'd much rather be the producer behind the scenes. It's why I don't mind scheduling. I don't mind even the editing and, you know, the post-production and the pre-interview stuff, you know, of whatever that entails. All of that's fine. The on-mic stuff is comfortable. I'm fun with it, or is fun and I'm comfortable with it, but it's not the end all be all for me. Like, I would be completely happy, you know, setting you up for a podcast and just being like, all right, well, you're going to record now. And then I'll just be in your ear and just be like, all right, there's one more question you should probably ask, you know, like whatever it is,
right.
That I'm it's not that I'm uncomfortable doing this. I think I'm more prepared and better to do it for someone else. That's probably, I think I answered your question.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, Shane, do you have one final question for me?
I do. If I can get Len Dayton to call you today, but you've only got time for 10-minute conversation, what one question would you ask him?
Oh, man. I think the one question I would ask him is just, what inspired him initially to start writing. I think I would end up talking to him about process, because this show has devolved into what would have been conversations. I always end up talking about process with people. Always. I don't know. Like, I guess it's something in me that I always wanted to know about, and now I have voice to that, but I would probably end up talking to him about process and writing. And, you said he drew out the narrative, so to speak, for those 9 books. I'm curious about, like, how you have the foresight to do that. And does he just sit down and write? Does he outline everything? It would be about process in some way, shape, or form. And then I'd have a heart attack.
Yeah. I've had an email from him, actually. And he's very humble guy. Very, considering the success he had as a writer, he's a very humble guy.
I could only be lucky enough to be that humble. Like, I try to be. I'm not very much a, hey, look at me kind of guy, even though, I think you're the same way. Like, we both host podcasts, but we're not like out there trying to get in the spotlight. We're just trying to share something with the world.
And this is why Spotify didn't give me $100 million to go move over to Spotify platform, like someone else we know. Maybe we should be a bit more like that. And then we could just sit and read books all day long.
That would be great. I mean, that's the life. That really is.
It's the dream. That's the dream.
Look, Andy, this has been fantastic. Do you have a question for me?
When did you first decide to do this, and why?
This show?
Yeah.
I first started to think about it 2 years ago, actually. This was a long time coming. I had been on other people's shows for a very long time and behind the scenes on other things, and it was time to come out from behind the curtain, so to speak. And it was like, all right, I guess it's my turn. I get to have these conversations with the people I want now, instead of, doing the prep and putting it out for someone else.
Good. Are you satisfied and happy with the way it's turned out?
Yes, because I have come to the idea. So I've been a blogger for like 6 or 7 years, and with the blog, the most important thing is putting out a quality product. When I hit publish, if I'm proud of it, that's fine. I don't need to make any money. And I'm taking that same approach with this. So, I'll take this episode, I'll edit it to, make, tighten it up where it needs to be tight. That's fine. Put it an intro and an outro together and then put it out. And as long as I'm proud of what I hit publish on, that's fine. And the secondary part, but which is like 1 and 1A, is I get to have this conversation with you, which even if it never goes anywhere, like, this is wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for encouraging me to speak. I appreciate it. I really do.
No, I mean, you've got, first of all, like, the stories you have are, I mean, I could talk to you for the next 3 hours. Like, and you've clearly got stories to fill that time. Everybody's got a story. Not everybody is willing to share it or comfortable sharing it, but everybody's got a story. We've all lived our lives. We've all gotten to wherever we are, and that hasn't been because we sat down and did nothing.
Right.
So,
can I tell you one final wizard story that I really am very happy about.
Yes, absolutely.
We went to the screening in Portland. Everybody sat through the film. Daniel held up. He said, we know we have the album for sale in the lobby, and he said, just out of curiosity, and I was standing on the stage at the time afterwards. He said, how many people have bought the album? And about 200 people held up their albums. And in my heart, it was, oh my God, this is wow. And then he said, and he'll be sitting at a table and he'll be happy to sign your albums and chat with you and all the rest of that stuff. And so at the end, people lined up. And my friend Casey, who came with me, he went out to see, and people were lined up around the block with albums. And they all came up to the table, and I wanted everybody to feel like we'd had a connection. I didn't want to go just, thank you, just wanted just a bit. And I asked them, what does Wizards mean to you? And almost, I would think, and we have it on video too, about 60-70% of people said it was the first movie I really connected with my father when I was 12 or 11. That was the film my dad took me to see, and it was the first time we really connected. And I heard the story once, and I heard the story again, and I heard the story again. And I'm looking at Casey, and he's just kind of amazed, as I am. There was that, whatever it was, it wasn't the music, it was whatever it was about Wizards, that for some reason, for some of these people, it marked a difference in their family dynamic.
Beautiful.
That's it.
I need to take a moment to thank the people that have helped me get to this episode and who continue to help on a regular basis, as this is the first opportunity where I have the floor to look back on the podcast as a whole as opposed to an honored guest or topic. So, in no particular order, accepting how they came into my head, Henno Heider of Monkey Tongue Productions has provided not only the opening and closing music for this podcast since day one, but also the many transitions that you heard in between clips during this particular episode. He was also a guest on episode 13 and will most likely return again at some point. Henno is much more than just the music man. He's also someone who I truly enjoy working with. We should do more. Bill Sweeney was responsible for the serious conversation that turned this particular episode from an idea into an actual project. He has been a mensch of an executive producer, putting in his 2 cents here and there, as long as it doesn't mean he has to do more work. But his ideas and his insight are, more often than not, spot on. And as the first guest ever for this show, he showed me that I could do this, actually do this. And he was also on episode 27 and one of the few 2-time guests in the show's history. Chris Hughes, another member of the Friendship episodes, which in his case was the mythical episode 26, a number so ridiculously linked to our past that it was almost written in the stars. He's not only my friend, he is still the best editor I will ever have for both agentpalmer.com and for making a few of these intros or outros pop. Despite his busy world, he still listens and we talk daily, trading stories of life, but both of us pushing the other's passions to the next level, wherever that happens to be. Next up, I have to mention my partner, Steph, who has dealt with canceled date nights and all of the time and energy I give to Agent Palmer with a smile. It also doesn't hurt that she is one of my biggest fans and was one of the original proponents of my doing a podcast of any kind years before I even considered it seriously. The only people left to talk about are my parents, because while I spoke in generalities during the intro, the true inspiration for this episode came from my parents when my father told me that my mother doesn't listen to the very end of the episodes, and I decided that she probably isn't the only one. They have been encouraging of all of my passion projects since I started looking for hobbies long ago, and that they even listen is a testament to how much they support me, even if it isn't to the very end. But seriously, Mom, you should always wait until there is no time left on the audio track. It's like waiting for the after credits scene. Or, say hello to Babs. But I digress. The bottom line is that I could do this alone, but it just wouldn't be as good. Do I take everyone else's ideas? Not all the time. Sometimes I ignore them completely, but they offer, and that is important. And they know that. This reiteration is for your information, my dear listeners. Passion projects are personal, but they are so much more, or at least they can be. This happens to be a podcast, but had it been a book, many of the names of the people I mentioned should have seen early drafts. Had it been a movie, some would have seen early scripts, others early versions of the film, or at least multiple takes of the same scene. Sharing your passion can be as gratifying as being the person who helps others. I have helped Henno and Bill and Chris and Steph with their passions, and I haven't stopped there, but it does feel like great writing to bring it back to them. So, what is your passion project? What passions are you helping your friends with? Do you need a push? Do they? Don't think too long about it. Just get in there and get it going. Thanks for listening to the Palmer Files, episode 42. As a reminder, all links are available in the show notes, and now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. You can tweet me at Agent Palmer and this show at The Palmer Files. You can see all of the guests and their Twitters and relative episodes in the show notes. And don't forget, you can see all of my writings and rantings on agentpalmer.com. And of course, email can be sent to the show, thepalmerfiles@gmail.com.
What is something I could say to you right now that would make you feel good?
I think just hello. Like I mean I know that that's the question in this moment, but I feel like just for me, anytime anybody picks up the phone, like whatever the greeting is, because you took my call, like that's all I need.
There you go. Well, let me say this. Hey, Palmer.
Thanks, Neil.
There you go.